This next guy, he's a writer, he's an illustrator, and a filmmaker. You can see his awesome webcomic online at adventuresofzip.co.uk, but not right now because there's some hosting problems. But wait a week, then go check it out. Please welcome to the stage, Mike Scrace.
Short people, am I right? It's actually When I was 21, I thought I had to save the world. I didn't, because as it turned out, I was in a psychiatric hospital. I just finished my film degree and was working on my comic book series, living with my dad and my sister in Bristol. People often think that the mentally ill are imagining or even faking their condition. They'll say dismissive things like, I don't really think you have a problem, or just get over it, or you just have to look on the bright side of things. That is, despite what the medical professionals are saying. Despite that, though, they'd have a hard time arguing their case based on my story. I'd suffered from chronic depression for several years, but it was just after Christmas that they noticed me acting strangely. Having outlandish and unfounded theories about quantum mechanics and the settlers of Catan. I don't know, I didn't. All of a sudden, I wasn't sure who I could trust. And I was having some memory problems. Yeah, memory loss is actually quite common in cases like mine. In many ways, a psychotic episode is like an abstract nightmare. Time seems to work differently. The absurd seems to make perfect sense. And although I changed my mind from moment to moment, predominantly I believed I was in hell. Literal hell. You know the one. In movies, psychos are supposed to be scary, but in reality they're like spiders. Probably more afraid of you than you are of them. My friends and family would try to remain composed around me, and I didn't understand how they could be so calm. I could only explain their calmness by thinking that they were doppelgangers or they'd been brainwashed. All I was really consistently sure of was that the nurses and the people around me were planning something sinister for the world, and I had to escape to try and rescue it. I would creep out at night and try and tamper with the electronically locked front door to get out. The first time I was allowed out of the ward I was being kept in, I tried to run away, but I didn't know the grounds well enough to be able to outrun them. I'd studied psychology before that, but I can really see now why it's so difficult for researchers to pin down what causes mental illness. I don't have a great memory of the things I said and did. I have a sort of hypothesis that my experience was something akin to an emergency drill subjected to me by my own subconscious. I got out and was kept on drugs that would stabilize my dopamine levels for about a year after that. Every month or so, psychiatric nurses would check up on me. The brain is something we don't really know all that much about, and to tell the truth, they don't know what causes or even how to treat psychosis. They can only look at what's worked before and try to repeat that. It's a big mystery, and if you think you know how the brain works, you probably don't. I've met a guy online. We mostly talked about comics and bemoaning the plights of being broke. He was about the same age as me, and shared accommodation. One night he came onto Facebook and told me he was contemplating suicide. I started answering his questions as if they were hypothetical at first, because I didn't know he was genuinely looking to do it. That is until he told me so. He told me that he was staying in a hostel because he'd been evicted from his house, because his housemates had found drug paraphernalia in his room. So I knew that when I didn't have anyone close to me to talk to, I'd been suicidal before, which made me think I'd better press him about this. I asked him a bunch of questions to figure out if he was really serious, and he was. So I called the police. They arrived at the location he'd given me, but he wasn't there. I worried because I'd only ever really seen photos of him online. And the police wanted to know as much detail as I could provide for him about him, but I couldn't because he was essentially a stranger. So I kept him talking to buy them time, trying to ask him questions about anything that I could think of that might help them try and figure out where he was, disguising it as idle chit-chat so he wouldn't get spooked and go offline. But then, that's precisely what he did. For hours, I wouldn't know if he was dead or alive, and neither would the police. They came round to my house at about 1 a.m. to ask me questions. They wanted to know people who knew him, but he was, like I said, a stranger. I didn't know those people. I tried using embedded script on a web page to get his IP address, which the police could use, but that didn't work. It showed us coming from a computer in some place in Surrey, which we were pretty sure wasn't true. Oh, I forgot to mention the guy's name. Well, we'll call him Andy. Anyway, we were running out of ideas, and the police were calling people around to try and find anyone that knew him. I wasn't just going to give up on him, though, because I didn't have any ideas. So I took to some extreme Facebook stalking, looking around for Andy's friends by trying to distinguish the ones, these social network sites. Pretty much everyone on there you call a friend can be anything from your bosom buddy to somebody you've known not since preschool. So I had to distinguish those close friends from the very loose acquaintances. I did this by checking through his photos and looking at the dates they've been taken, looking at the tags left on the photos, and using the site's check-in feature to figure out where he'd been and who he'd been with, and how recently. Still, as I went through, I wasn't having much luck. I'd had a small list of names that I might be able to give to the police, but as time went on, my contact with them became less and less frequent. He'd been offline for hours now, and I wasn't sure what had happened to him. I had no idea if he was okay or no way of checking. They called me at about 5 a.m. and I didn't know what they would tell me. I waited with bated breath. They'd found him. He was getting help in a new house. The next day, he was online singing his solicitor's praises. No mention of my name, but I don't care. He's still alive, and I don't know if he knows the role I played in that. Ultimately, I try to remember that if I'd killed myself before then, we might both be dead now. People will often disregard your anxieties as attention-seeking. But the problem with that model is that these experiences are often very internal. And the trouble there is, if internal thoughts remain internal, they might get serious. my experiences have taught me that these internal thoughts staying inside can really have a strong effect.
Thanks.